What's up, guys? Coach JJ Morris here. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about how the hamstring truly affects soccer performance and athletes' performance in general. And it's contrary to what most people believe. One of the issues that plagues sports performance and athletes in general is that we view the hamstring as something that curls the actual lower leg up. So if I were to turn to the side and basically curl my leg up, if I was on a standing leg curl or a lying leg curl, and kind of bring my heel to my butt, that's kind of how I view the hamstring as functioning. And that view really comes from probably the bodybuilding world and the commercial gym industry, where we see machines that basically sit us down or lay us down or stand us up and curl our leg backwards. But in reality, what's actually happening when an athlete moves, either laterally or sprints forward and propels themselves, is that the hamstring is shortening and actually extending the torso. So if you can imagine, the hamstring attaches at the bottom of the pelvis, shoots down behind the leg, wraps around to the front of the tibia. And when that hamstring actually shortens on an athlete, what's happening is generally they're in a hinged position. So they'll be hinged down, and then they'll go to make an explosive movement forward or to the side. And what we see is hip extension, right? And what really happens is when that hamstring contracts, because my foot is in the ground, that's considered a closed chain movement. Closed chain meaning the end of my foot is now attached to the ground, right? So it's moving up, the movement is moving up into my center mass, my torso, so that movement is a closed chain. Whereas if I were to sit on a chair and do a banded single leg hamstring curl, that's an open chain movement, which are useful to develop the ligaments and tendons and for other general purposes of just condition the hamstring. But in reality, the function of the hamstring for an athlete is to extend the torso. So move us through hip extension, either forward for forward propulsion, vertically up off the ground, or even laterally for abduction. So one of the reasons in America we're so plagued by hamstring injuries, in my opinion, is that we place such an emphasis on open chain movements and movements that are specifically for one muscle group, or the complete opposite, which is compound movements, right? So we'll either do ultra high volume on squats, or we'll go and we'll do all of our movements in single joint stuff like bodybuilding exercises, or we'll just run. We'll just do the actual compound exercise itself and the sport movement that we feel is going to be the most adequate for the athlete. When in reality, when we change a part on a car, right? Let's say the exhaust is malfunctioning on your car. You change the exhaust, right? And then if the exhaust fixes the problem, then boom, you fix the issue, right? And if the exhaust didn't fix the problem, then you move up the chain to the next issue. So when we're looking at diagnosing movement malfunction and problems and injury precursors in athletes, generally we're gonna look at the muscles that surround the joints, because in America we really suffer from a lot of soft tissue injuries, ligaments and tendons. And our belief is that we don't start the GPP process early enough. In other countries, their athletes start resistance training and mechanical training and functional training at a very young age, as young as 7 years old in most countries, and in some countries, like the Hungarians, they start their resistance and flexibility and mobility training at a very, very young age. We're talking 3 and 4 years old. Where over here, it's not common to see athletes lifting weights or doing any type of resistance work whatsoever until 12 or 13, sometimes even 14 years old, which you're completely missing the ball on developing strength within the structural system, bone density, ligament tendon thickness, and elasticity, as well as the attachments of those, the insertions of those things, which are very, very important. So that's kind of a little pre-frame there, but going back into the hamstring, think about this. When I'm hinged and my hamstring, right, is gonna contract and shorten and extend my torso. If my hamstring is not strong enough to do that action, something else is gonna compensate. And more often than not, when you see an athlete that has poor running form, it's because they're running with their quads. And what happens is when they get in that hinged position and they go to propel themselves and explode forward or laterally, and the hamstring can't really extend the torso, they end up bending themselves forward, artificially extending the torso, and then finishing the movement with knee extension, extending the quads, right? And then think of in a soccer situation where an athlete is moving laterally and then they go to cut off that right leg and they're gonna rotate in. That's where we start to see the next most important function, or the second most important function of the hamstring, and that's to prevent dynamic knee valgus, right? Or to control that. Valgus and Varus is essentially where the tibia is going to internally or externally rotate opposite of the femur in the knee joint, right? So if the tibia is internally rotating and the femur is externally rotating, that's going to be a bad thing when we get to a certain point. Likewise, if the hip is internally rotating and the femur rotates internally and the tibia starts to rotate externally, now we have another issue. This is where most of your ACL injuries, MCL injuries happen. It's from the valgus and varus that happens in soccer because it's such a dynamic, lateral, explosive sport. One of the major issues is that our training system for our soccer players at most levels, even all the way up into the college level, consists of massive amounts of conditioning, long-term running, which develops slow twitch muscle fiber, if you want to call it that, or the smaller, faster motor units, or excuse me, the smaller, slower motor units, because it's more efficient for the athlete to run long distances with. And in reality, most positions on the soccer field are explosive positions. And even the ones, you have your midfielders and wings that you know, they're required to run a bit more or even a lot more than other players. Most of the time, it's very light jogging, sometimes trotting, many times even walking. A play develops and now it's explosive movement laterally. Or when the ball gets close, now it's an explosive movement, right? So it creates a very dynamic situation where the athlete have to explode and perform anaerobically using fast twitch muscle fibers, or the largest, fastest motor neurons and motor units, which you'll often hear us talking about, so that recruitment, right, is very maximal. So you need that maximal strength that we talk about on the force velocity curve, and the ability to produce maximum power, right? But if we don't train our muscles like that, to make this very simple, imagine having a hamstring that's designed, and not really in reality, not developed at all, but if it is developed, it's developed to function in a very slow, long-term endurance situation, because that's what happens in practice. That's what 2 mile times are produced, and 2 mile training and gassers and this, you know, long endurance-based conditioning. That's what happens. Your body becomes becomes aerobic. You lose your anaerobic capabilities as the body becomes over-oxidized, right? Because the body's gonna adapt to whatever training stimulus we put in. Likewise, if we build a system around maximum effort and then dynamic effort, which is rate of force development, build maximal strength and acceleratory ability and explosive strength, and then condition them to be able to jump and bound and move in very explosive lateral movements, when they're called upon, or when they're going to call upon that demand in a game, they're going to be able to perform like that. Right now, to go another step further, something else that the hamstring will do, it's going to prevent my body from letting my femur internally rotate or hyperextend too far, right? So when I take collision from a soccer player, from an opponent, when they're coming at me and I take that collision, if my hamstring is strong enough, it will help prevent that hyperextension that we'll see, or that very painful looking valgus and varus, where the femur is coming in, the tibia is going out, or the femur is going out and the tibia is coming in, and I'm getting this basically separation in the knee joint, or where the tibia comes forward and the femur moves behind, or the femur comes in front and the tibia comes behind. The hamstring being correctly developed, right, with an adequate amount of strength and power, is going to control the position of our lower leg in relation to our femur, which is essential for ACL injury prevention. And then again, the torso extension properties, or the function of the hamstring in a closed chain, how an athlete actually moves on the field, is unbelievably important for an athlete's performance, right? So training the hamstring in a closed chain setting primarily, and then aiding with other exercises like we've given below that help develop in an open chain and thicken the ligaments and tendons and aid in the stretch reflex, are going to be essential. They're going to be crucial, and it's going to build a hamstring that can perform the demands that the athlete needs it to perform. We're going to get a chance to look at how your hamstrings function in relation to your body weight, which is extremely important. Producing ground contact force and developing maximal power output, and then conditioning the athlete to be able to do it over and over again. That's the name of the game in soccer. And if you want a fast, explosive soccer player that can produce forward acceleration, lateral movement, lateral cutting ability, it's gonna start with the hamstrings and hip extension and hip abduction. It's gonna be very, very important that your athlete can move and bound and explode in those multiple directions. And that's one of the things that we'll look at when we do a KEP assessment. We'll look at, how the hip can internally rotate, externally rotate. Can I use my hamstring to internally rotate and externally rotate my tibia? Can I isolate my ankle, and can I move my foot separate from my tibia? Can I control that? Can I use the muscles in my lower leg to control that ankle mobility? And if I can do those things, that's going to make it so that when I'm in compromising positions on the field, I can control the different parts of my body and get out of compromising positions where I otherwise may experience an injury. On top of the fact that it's going to make me a much more dynamic, fluid, explosive soccer player. So again, comment below, shoot us an email if you have any questions. And if you feel like you may be the type of athlete that needs more hamstring development, wants more speed and power on the soccer field, and you want to be a more dynamic, explosive player that has power, endurance, and can last throughout the game, definitely come in, give this KEP assessment a try. Let us look at how your body's function and show you how you can develop hamstrings and a posterior chain that's going to make you not only bulletproof, but a very, very dominant player on the soccer field. Talk to you soon.